We will call this meeting to order. We are here to have a public hearing on the Department of Education portion of the FY15 budget. I think each of the members now has a tracking document to work from. Let me point out to you, if you look on that first page under Ag Education, just as an example, on line 23.1.1, you notice the little S in front of the description. Maybe under your book. That indicates that the S indicates that that's a statewide change, and it's not. And there are a number of those throughout the budget, just so you know what that notation is for. Scott, are you ready? We will hear from Scott, and then members are free to ask questions. Looks like all of the committee members are up here at the end of Scott's presentation, we'll have some time for public comment too. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I haven't gone this way yet.
I don't think I'm quite that tall. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to go over, if I may, the changes or the budget that the governor has proposed for fiscal year 15. As you have pointed out on the tracking document that I have, which is the House tracking document, the Department of Education budget starts on my version on page 35 of 94. Yes, sir. Just making sure. And as you have pointed out, Mr. Chairman, there are a number of changes that the governor is proposing throughout the programs in the DOE budget and others, I understand, and they're related to changes to the ERS and TRS systems, as well as a slight merit adjustment proposal, and finally some adjustments that are common throughout for TeamWorks, which is lovingly referred to as PeopleSoft. So those are all common changes, and unless members have questions, I won't address them. And if I may, I'll just talk about the changes in the governor's budget proposal outside of those that are common for all programs. And I believe if I start on 23.8, which is the Georgia Virtual School, you will see the governor is proposing an increase of $800,000, and that is primarily to allow for the Department of Education to build out courses and materials, digital materials for elementary schools. Currently, through our virtual school, we provide resources to all of the schools. In addition to providing courses, of course, we provide all of our resources to the school districts. In fact, we provide, if you will, a virtual textbook for every course that we offer. That has been well received by many of our districts. Unfortunately, we have very, very few, if any, resources in the elementary school. And so the governor's intent is to allow the Georgia Virtual School to develop courses for K-5 for the elementary school. Predominantly, this will be 3, 4, and 5, because that's where the changes are in math and science, et cetera. And they will be used not only for the courses that would be taken by elementary school students, but importantly, they will also be provided in the teacher resource link to be utilized by all of the teachers, and they will be provided in our website for all parents to use as well. So these are important resources that we're missing in the elementary school that we do currently provide to high school and middle school students.
I've already had some questions from committee members when we talked about this change in the 14 budget, about what types of courses we're talking about. Can you give us some kind of notion as to what the starting point, what courses would be the first to be developed, that kind of thing?
Yes, sir. You are correct. In the 14 supplemental budget, the governor is recommending that we redistribute $700,000 from the IT area, which includes the teacher resource link, into the virtual school to begin the course development in the elementary school. The types of courses that I've referenced would be primarily reading, so it would be ELA and reading, as well as math and science support. Again, I want to really emphasize, if I may, that these digital resources, again, I would emphasize the issue of having a virtual textbook for school districts that don't currently have textbooks. This is a virtual textbook that we are providing to every school district, and we provide it both through the teacher resource link, which means it is aligned for classroom teachers through our teacher resource link system. It's also made available to all parents on the website.
Because resources for local school systems are very limited, in particularly in terms of art education, music education, is there a way to adapt courses for those areas that would assist?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, absolutely. We would be able to adapt the development of courses for art and probably music as well. The way the virtual school determines what courses will be developed is that they look firstly at, they talk with the school systems and ask the school systems what their students are interested in learning virtually. So they will start with prioritizing courses for which there seems to be a high demand. Now, in the case of having a need for providing math and ELA digital resources for teachers in elementary school, I suspect that too will be a big focus. I know, of course, that the governor is very interested in making sure that students are proficient in reading by the 3rd grade, and then continuing that focus on reading and ELA in the 4th and 5th grade. So while we will have the ability to flex, if you will, or respond to requests for music and art and some of the other areas, I do know that initially, particularly in the 14 supplemental budget, the governor is very focused on making sure that we have ELA, math, and reading courses available, materials available for all the teachers and parents. If I may, Mr. Chairman and members, 23.9 is the Governor's Honors Program. The Governor is recommending in the 15 budget that the program be moved completely or transferred to the Governor's Office of Student Achievement. That is consistent with the 14 supplemental request in the Governor's budget, where we have already moved half of the program. So this will complete that transfer. And as is referenced here, there is an executive order signed on July 26th of 2013. If I may, in the next program, 23.10 is information technology. If I may, 2310.5, you'll see that there is a $982,000 recommendation. This is for enhancement of the longitudinal data system, the teacher resource link, which I just referenced earlier with the virtual school, as well as, although we probably don't have enough funding for this, but in some areas we would, the learning management system. I understand from the Office of Planning and Budget that this is approximately 9 positions that our Chief Information Officer had requested. It actually does continue and allow the state to continue the LDS program, which of course has benefited from both Race to the Top money and, more importantly, from $8.9 million in LDS money, which we have spent over the course of the last 5 years. So this is, if you will, maintenance and operations for the LDS and the TRL. In 23.11, the non-QBE programs, there are 2 adjustments. I'll start with the simpler one first. In 23.11.4, the governor is requesting an increase in growth for the residential treatment centers. As a reminder to members, there are 2 ways that the residential treatment centers receive money through the state budget. The first is through QBE. Those numbers flow through the QBE budget. And here in the non-QBE program budget, we provide supplemental funds to the RTCs. And these supplemental funds are also based on enrollment growth. So the governor is reflecting a change for growth in the RTCs. The other change, 23.11.3, is a significant, it's a small dollar, relatively small dollar amount change, but it is significant, and that is the governor is asking that we not only continue the existing $2.6 million in sparsity, but also add an additional 34 schools, which are in 22 new school systems. So we would be increasing the sparsity grant by about $2.5 million, the purpose of which would be to include 34 new schools. Yes, ma'am. The formula that we used is a portion of the base unit of the teacher grant. I'm going to say it's around $1,000, and I'm going to pull up the formula. In our calculation, we used only the teacher portion of the base unit, even though many of the schools are elementary schools. So we are using the same, we're recommending through the governor's budget the same dollar amount. I'm estimating, yes, that it was about $1,000. Oh, sorry. Again, Mr. Chairman, I know that we're very pleased for the recommendation. And Madam Chair, I thought the question was going to be the relevance of this to the school systems, and we may remember that of the 21 existing school systems, this amount in some cases represented 8 to 12% of the amount of state funding they receive. So it is a small amount relative to the budget, but it is significant for the small systems, and the same will be able to be said for the 22 new systems if they're added.
Mr. Chairman, that was Robert's fourth most mentioned item.
Yeah, let me remind you, because there are people who are watching, when you don't use a microphone, all they hear is a blank space. So, you know, you're not on yet. But you will be. Now you're on.
Mr. Chairman, isn't it true that that was probably the fourth most mentioned item on our listening sessions that heard? How much that helped some of these small systems?
Mm-hmm. Right, and we've heard from a number of representatives who's had schools or systems that were added, so it's been very positive. Yes.
Just to make sure, so it currently give it to 21 systems, is that right?
That is correct.
And so it will now be 55.
43. So there are 21 systems, and we'll be adding 22 additional systems, so there would be 43 systems in total, and 34 new schools. So some of the systems have more than one school. Yes, ma'am. This funding does not go to every student in the school system. It only goes to the schools. It has to do with the size of the school. Only those schools that qualify receive it.
Good deal. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Chairman, if I may, moving to 23.13, the preschool handicap. There's an adjustment for training and experience of $443,000. 23.15, just to point out that there's a $28 million increase in the cost to the state, if you will, for the QBE funds. This is reflective of the fact that the local tax digests have declined. And just as a reminder for members, this is not to be overly concerned about tax digests still falling, because what we're seeing is they're somewhat leveling out. The numbers that we use are about 2 years old, so the tax digest is not reflective of the change into this year. It's reflective of the trend that was occurring in prior years. So that's why you see the steeper decline than what we might expect. In 23.16, the Quality Basic Education Program, there are a lot of changes here. I should mention, just as we go down the list, I'll mention the ones that that may not be entirely self-explanatory. 23.16.4, the charter system grants. I do want to point out that there are 3 new charter systems that are coming online in this funding, and so this increase reflects both a growth adjustment for the existing charter systems as well as bringing 3 new school systems into the funding. And as a reminder, we still have the $4.5 million cap, so I think Fulton was the only one that ever came close to reaching that cap, but we do have that cap in place, and it is 3 systems. Yes, sir.
Do we have any indication of how many more systems are likely to come on?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I suppose it depends. I know that it depends on the flexibility language. I know, for example, in the I don't know, there was a tracking document, but there was a document, House and Senate version of things that you all heard. We heard them too because we were there. From the members of the community, and this was one of the issues that was raised, and it is flexibility. A lot of the school districts are very worried about having to pick either charter system status quo, or IE squared. And so I just point that out. I know that in the document that I saw from the House and Senate, that was one area where there's some considerable. So to answer your question, if we don't have additional flexibility, we have about 150 school districts that will have to either become charter system or IE squared.
That was a roundabout way of saying you don't have an answer.
It'll be a whole lot if something doesn't change in the law, put it that way.
Representative Maxwell.
Mr. Chairman, clarification, Scott, if you don't mind. You said there's, okay, this 1.817, that's the new money going in. Do you know what the total amount we're spending on that now?
Yes,
And you said there's a $4 million cap. Did y'all put that in through regulation, or how do we get the $4 million cap?
the $4.5 million cap is statutory. I believe it's about $12 million, and I'm going to get.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's cool.
It's in here somewhere. About 12 million.
So the total charter funding is about 11.1 million in 2015, with the 1.1 million in approximately 1.1 million in growth. And that growth reflects three charter systems: Banks, Coffee, and Harrelson.
Okay. About 11 million, you said?
Yes, sir, just over.
Thank you. Okay.
No, sir. 11 million would be the total. So it's a little over 1 million is the cost of the three new systems coming online, as well as growth in the existing charter systems. I should mention 23.16.6. There's an $8.6 million increase that is recommended. That is both for growth and an adjustment for adding back in state health benefits, and that's about 18.5% of the cost of a FTE segment. So coming into this year, and I believe last year we removed the 18.5% that had been paid out for state health benefits, and it had to do with the fact that the state went to direct pay. And QBE had been funded as 18.5% of all salaried employees. QBE moved to become direct bill. And so as a practical matter, when we paid the segments to be technically proficient, we didn't have the 18.5% included. So the governor is recommending that we restore the 18.5%. Of course, the folks that are having to pay that difference tend to be the parents of kids who are transferring from the public school into the private school, because they have to pay the difference between what the state funds and what their private school would charge.
Scott, if with that change in how we handle insurance for systems, every teacher was funded for insurance, but don't we now only fund those teachers that are actually taking the health insurance?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. In direct bill, we don't fund percentage. We fund, right now it's about $11,000 per teacher for only those employees or teachers that take state health benefits insurance, and it's about 82% or so right now.
So now we've got a differential between how we're going to treat the voucher program and how we treat regular schools.
Yes, it makes it difficult for us because the law says whatever we pay out in a QBE segment. Well, technically we have adjusted what we pay out in a QBE segment because we no longer pay 18.5%. To answer your question more directly, that segment, though, it doesn't consider the fact that we have a bottom line adjustment in the allotment sheet for direct bill, which is a way of saying if we take the QBE segment as a purist, if we take the QBE segment, the amount of money that's currently in the weights table for the state health benefits is 0. It used to be 18.5%. So taking that calculation, top line, produces 18.5% less than it used to. There happens to be an adjustment that we accomplish on a bottom line basis, not part of the normal QBE weights tables, to adjust for the actual participating teachers. And this is the problem, and so the governor has recognized the issue and is proposing that we fund a portion of the state health benefits for those teachers that are, for those segments that are going to parents who are using that to offset the cost of their private school.
But is he doing that at 18.9%, or is he doing it at what the average percentage would be for systems around the state?
It was at 18.5, and we used the averages at 82, or? No, when we pay, no, we'll get to the question. I think I understand the question, which is, are we giving 18.5% of the total, or are we giving 18.5% times 0.82, which would be the participation rate? 18.5% flat is what's in the recommendation.
We need to look at that.
And I'll confirm that, and we'll confirm that, because I think we had talked.
It should be reflective of whatever the state average is, not what the old 18% was.
We have used the state average in the past in other formulas, and then we've pretty much moved to being direct. The problem, of course, we have in this particular grant area is that we have no insight into the participation rate of teachers, or even whether the private schools are offering health care. So, but yes, you're correct. We'll get you additional information and take this.
Yes, let's get together on that.
Yes, sir.
Quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I did have one further question. How much of that 8.6 is growth, and how much of that is the health care?
I'm hoping I have the answer to that.
Or you can get it if you don't.
And I will have, looks like I'll have to get it for you. I'm going to say the majority of it is actually the 18.5%. Denise, do you remember that?
I believe that's...
No. I know the majority of it
Yeah.
is the 18.5% adjustment.
So some of it's for growth, and then the portion that's healthcare, it appears it's not that amount times 82%, but it's assuming 100%.
I believe that this year this number is assuming 100%, and I apologize I didn't have that calculation. We have used 82% for some of the local charters, not the same audience we're addressing here, but nonetheless we've used different numbers. I do believe that this number is the 18.5%.
Okay. If you could get us
And I will
that
get you that
breakout
number.
of those, the growth, the healthcare, and then that. Thank you.
And if I may, moving to a very positive note, 23.16.
Just a minute.
Yes.
We have, you're on.
Scott, I noticed down there, 23.16.5, adjust school nursing fund. Remember QB Study Commission, we talked about 4 or 5 areas that we wanted to, I think this is the 3rd year, supposed to take care of that. So this is funding the final year for nurses, right?
It is following the recommendation, yes. And I believe this is I believe this is the final year. The actual recommendation, I think, had a slightly higher percentage of 50%, and I don't know if the intent is to get fully up to 50% of the salary next year or this. The governor's recommendation currently has a 45% recommendation, and I believe that's, yes, it is.
Also, we did this, and I don't see it in here, but we also adjusted the counselors and buses, but maybe we did that later, I'm not sure. Counselors, we cut them last year, adjusted the ratios now. Are we taking care of that in this budget, or is that left out?
Well, I would say that is subsumed in the $314 million addition.
It's in all here, we didn't put it out.
It would be in the restoration. So if I may, I'll some members who
That would be
might be
up to
wondering.
both systems then.
That's correct. So there is a recommendation. Actually, it was in the law to change based on the funding task force, to change the number of counselors that are earned for different programs within QBE. So in fiscal year 15, I believe the change was supposed to have occurred. That is that special ed and ESOL students would earn counselors, and they have not earned it in the past. And then for next year, 16, which of course would not be in this budget, it would be for gifted and alternative. It's my understanding that those numbers have not been adjusted specifically, so there's no line item in the governor's recommendation for counselors. However, in the $314 million restoration of QBE, the governor is saying that he is providing flexibility. Or said differently, absolutely. So in line 23.16.8, the governor is recommending a $314 million increase. That's a significant reduction to austerity. That would be correct. That would be correct. And as you can see, the main focus is on flexibility. The governor's first priority is actually in restoring the furlough days and, of course, accomplishing an increase in teacher salaries in that way.
Why did the nurses stay out? Why didn't they go in?
Well, the nursing is here. The recommendation is slightly less in terms of the percentages. And I didn't know if the governor was intending to increase from 45% up to 50% next year or not. It's not current. It's in QBE, but it's not in the 314.
It's additional, right?
Yes, sir.
Scott, if what you're saying, if I accept what you're saying, that the money for counselors is there, but it's in that $314 million, is there an allotment sheet when they get a system allotment sheet going to show the higher earning of counselors?
We probably will adjust the allotment sheets to reflect the change in the staff position earned. Of course, the allotment sheet, unfortunately, doesn't take into consideration austerity. So that's a way of saying we'll tell the school districts how many staff they're supposed to have. The problem is there's a bottom line reduction called austerity, and the school districts have to pick or decide what they're going to eliminate in order to accomplish the austerity. So the good news is that with this restoration, austerity is coming down significantly from 14.1% down to 9.7%. But there's still a 9% reduction to the budget. And so, yes, we will adjust the allotment sheets, but I don't want to suggest that that's going to force all of the systems to have to hire that number, because we know that school systems are making adjustments all throughout their districts, and that's why the governor's using the word flexibility to accomplish the budget reduction.
Right, I understand that, but we had heard at one point that you weren't going to adjust the allotment sheets. Having the adjustment on the allotment sheet will make it easier for counselors in different systems to go to their powers that be and say, we need part of that money for this.
Yes, it will. And of course, the state board would be asked for any sort of the staffing positions. If the school systems are not going to be following the staffing positions, the school districts are required to request a waiver from the state board. The state board has been generally very flexible with school systems that can show financial need. And frankly, with the 14.1% austerity we've had in the past, that was a pretty compelling case. As we now see a significant reduction in austerity, I know that the board will be looking very closely at requests to not provide the number of counselors that is indicated on the allotment sheets. I think that responds to your question. So we will show it, but I don't want to suggest that that is binding, in that we're not fully funding QBE. Even with this major restoration, we still have a ways to go.
Okay. Anything else?
If I may, in 23.17, the RESA program, there are two changes. The first is a funding for a new sub-program for positive behavioral intervention systems, and I think many representatives and some of our senators did participate in a number of hearing sessions with our state board chair facilitated, where we talked about PBIS. This was a recommendation coming from a larger task force. So these funds will be utilized throughout each of our 16 RESAs. The governor's recommendation is for $560,000. That will accomplish that would be a part-time position for each of our RESAs, and there would be one coordinator, which will not be a new staff member. It would be our existing staff member at the Department of Education, who will be coordinating the activities of the PBIS specialists. And we've already spoken with a number of the RESAs, and this is something they're very supportive of. The second change, 23.17.2, is a redirect within a sub-program. So in the RESA program, there's a sub-program that is for a technology career ed training. So our RESAs provide technology support to schools in that line, in that sub-program line. The governor is requesting that we allocate $720,000 of the approximately $1.1 million of the technology money into ELA support. And this is, again, a recommendation from our state board as well as the department. With the Common Core and the GPS Common Core and whatever else it is that we're going to be rolling out, there's a perceived need to increase the support of ELA in all areas. And so this was a way for us to accomplish support of the ELA and maintaining some of what we had been able to do with Race to the Top without putting in and providing additional state funds. 23.18.5, there's a slight increase for school improvement. And again, this is reflective of the changes that we see in Race to the Top, as well as the rollout in particular of the teacher evaluation model and the leader evaluation models. GNET's 23.19, the governor is recommending.
Scott,
yes, sir.
the additional support for school improvement, does that reflect 1 or 2 positions, or what is that?
That would be reflective of probably 1 position and some additional travel and support. And this person, my understanding is that the staff member would be a regional person, not located here at department, but reporting here, but would be out in the field. So 23.19.3, the governor is recommending a change to the name of the SED program, a change from SED to GNETS, Georgia Network for Educational and Therapeutic Support. Secondly, the governor is recommending an increase for T&E, an adjustment of just over $1 million. In the state schools, 23.22.4, again, there's a T&E adjustment that is recommended. And just as a reminder, thank you, because our teachers in our 3 state schools, while they are teachers and they are certified and we do pay them off of the salary schedule, they don't report under CPI. And so we have to actually request the funds be put in. So we calculate the amount and we put it in, but it doesn't naturally flow through, say, the QBE formula that you would see for a school system.
Yes, sir.
Scott, is there still a 2-year lag in that, or 1 year? T&E?
T&E is 1 year, sir.
Just 1 year
Yes,
lag?
1 year. Uh, 23.24, in our testing budget, you'll see the governor is making recommendations for some significant change. I think we all recognize that a lot of what will happen in the area of the CRCT and the EOCT is somewhat uncertain, so the governor's recommendation of $10 million is that. We will need to be making significant adjustments to both the CRCT and the EOCTs. In particular, one, our test contracts are all more than 6 years old, so we know that just in the market now costs have gone up since we first priced the contracts for our tests. Secondly, and probably more importantly, the Georgia Performance Standards, the Common Core Georgia Performance Standards, and any other thing that we move to are all going to be moving toward more open-ended type of questions. Now, not all open-ended, but some open-ended. And by that I mean not just multiple choice. The cost of a test that is not just multiple choice tends to be in the scoring and reporting. And so that's the real reason for us understanding and just looking at other states that the costs will go higher. We are going to be putting out an RFP, request for proposal, for our CRCT and EOCT tests this month. And until we receive back the proposals from the vendors out there, we won't know the real cost. So this is, suffice it to say, the governor's best estimate, a reasonable estimate of what he thinks the test costs will be, the increase will be. We are working with the governor's office and others and other states, frankly, to manage the cost down as much as possible. And we've just entered into, for example, an arrangement with Kentucky to share questions. So to the extent that we're able to provide questions to them and they're able to provide questions to us, we will do that. That's actually one of the benefits of having a normalized curriculum that's more similar among different states.
Representative Kaiser has a question for you.
Mr. Chair. Scott, just to be clear, the difference is more like 17. Are you talking about 10 million just for those 2 tests?
Yes, I am. I am. And there are some additional changes. I was talking about the largest change in the 10 million. There are some additional, as we've talked about, some of those are with the S, are the things that are common among all of the programs. So the first 4 items. There's all, ma'am.
No.
The Parcc Assessment is, the state is no longer going to be participating in the Parcc Assessment. The Parcc Assessment was going to be the replacement of the CRCT and would have provided some degree of testing for the EOCT subjects, well, not all of them. The governor made a decision to take the state out of Parcc, and that again was something that we heard throughout the state. There were a lot of concerns about the federal government testing our kids and the degree to which the federal government would be able to control our curriculum if they were controlling the test. Now, the federal government, of course, was never writing the Parcc questions, but they were funding the Parcc question development. And so the governor, in a letter to the state board several months ago, instructed the State Board of Education that we would not be utilizing Parcc, which incidentally would be considerably more than $10 million. And cost was a major concern, one of the major concerns. But he also asked that the state board review the Common Core. The Parcc Assessment, if it's even ready, is the Parcc Assessment is being developed with federal funds currently. That's who's paying for it, would be the federal government, the U.S. Department of Education. And some participating states who are paying membership fees into CCSSO, which is a state school superintendent, a national state school superintendent. But the majority and lion's share of the development of the questions is being funded by the federal government through the U.S. Department of Education. The cost, however, would have been significantly more than the $10 million currently reflected here in the scoring and reporting. And that would have been a cost that Georgia would have had to absorb completely. So even though the questions themselves would have been relatively free, the scoring and reporting of all of these open-ended questions would have been significantly more expensive.
Speaker Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question specifically on the 2 math end-of-course tests for high school. And I just can't seem to get the right information on this. So I understand we have integrated math, but a school system can also get a waiver. I think that's what's current, I'm not sure, to do traditional math. But if you do traditional math, will this $10 million also pay for the development of 2 traditional math end-of-course tests for high school students?
Yes, it will, in fact. And I believe, although I'm the finance guy, but I do understand how the funding works. I think when you say traditional math, I think what you're referring to would be the discrete. So there was discrete, and by discrete it means a student, traditionally a student would take Algebra 1, and then Geometry, and then Algebra 2. Okay, and those are discrete. Algebra, Geometry, Algebra. In the integrated math that we actually introduced in the state through the Georgia Performance Standards, we used the integrated approach, which was some algebra, introducing geometry, and then bringing in some algebra. So it was stair-stepping and mixing the courses together. It was problematic for a lot of our teachers. I don't know that it was better or worse, but it was problematic. And to your point, Madam Chair, the governor is recommending as part of this money that we look to fund the discrete model. Mostly it's the discrete model. So we're not going to, in fact, have the integrated math test. There are some school districts which continue to want to offer the integrated approach. When and if time allows, we will be providing some questions, and we may even have some kind of an alternate assessment for the integrated math. But actually, most of the Common Core and the math, the changes to the GPS are reflective of the traditional or the discrete.
So this, for discrete math into-course tests, they would be available, I guess, next school year, which would be the 14-15 year. Is that correct? Not for this school year. They wouldn't have an end-of-course test available.
Oh, that's great. It will not change the end-of-course test for this year.
For this year.
We're actually, even with our existing vendors, we are in the process of developing additional questions for the EOCT. And those questions are different than they've been in the past, and they are discrete. They are discrete questions. So you will see in next year's tests,
Right.
and so the 14-15 year, you will see new questions, and those questions will be they'll be for the traditional or the discrete math course.
So are all school systems offering integrated math this year?
My understanding is that most systems are not offering the integrated. Most systems are preferring the discrete.
This year, in this school year?
This school year.
So how will they test? How will they test those math students this year?
Well, they will use our test, and our test is actually the discrete. It's mostly discrete. There were some integrated.
Okay.
In fact, we rolled out, and I'm not sure which EOCT test you might be talking to folks about, the 9th grade EOCT test, for example, that we had very bad performance on statewide. That particular test was discrete, but it had more questions that were open-ended.
Okay.
And it asked students to make, to understand and interpret what they were looking at more than just filling in numbers. Mm-hmm. So the difficulty, from my understanding of this 9th grade assessment we've just rolled out, was not that it is integrated while the school districts prefer the discrete. The problem is that it is more of the open-ended, higher thinking level question that is going to be reflected in tests in the next 2 years.
So the bottom line is school systems will be covered. This year they're offering discrete math. There's a discrete end-of-course test. Next year we'll have another discrete test for them to utilize, whether it's open-ended or not.
That is correct.
That's right. Thank you.
Representative Coleman?
Pushing that question, you and I questioned the
Yeah.
testing people, and that's where I'm confused. Because we instructed the State Department 2 years ago to go back traditionally. That was it. And that's where they moved it back traditional, was allowing the last 2 grades to finish out. And we were told, standing right out there, that they don't have the money to do.
A week ago.
A week ago, they don't have the money to do both. And so those that are doing the traditional, that's just their problem this year. Now, you saying we're going to may get to it next year, but that's my concern, that a bunch of systems out there don't have to develop it all this year.
So let me be clear. The tests that we offer are discrete or traditional. The tests that we offered a number of years ago, back when Kathy Cox and we first came out with the GPS, those were integrated. Georgia has moved back to the discrete. That you are correct. That happened several years ago. No, the test is ready. The difficulty, though, I just want to be clear as you talk to folks, we had horrible performance on 9th grade math. I'm sorry, I'm the finance guy. All right, 37% of our kids, or 39% of our kids, passed it. The inverse is over 60% of our kids failed the 9th grade math test. It was not because it was integrated. It was because it required the kids to think according to an independent assessment. And that is telling, because the difficulty of that 9th grade assessment, albeit it was in the traditional model, is reflective of the kinds of questions that the students are going to be seeing 2 years hence when we move into the adjusted test for Common Core, or the Georgia Performance Standard Common Core. So, and it's not integrated versus discrete. It is that they actually are having to interpret the information more, not just fill in the number.
You know, my biggest concern is we do away with the graduation test. Let's stop that. We've fought that for years. Go
Okay.
Mr. Chair. Madam Chair.
Madam Chair?
Representative
Pro Tem.
Jones. I had one more question. Considering how Georgia students did on the testing, but beyond that, if multiple choice is good enough for the SAT, the ACT, the LSAT, and the MCAT, so that students can get into Harvard, Georgia Tech, Harvard Medical School, Emory Medical School, MCG, and law school, why isn't it good enough for Georgia for our EOCT tests?
Because the short answer is not because of race to the top, but because of the federal funding. Our tests have to be what's called peer reviewed. They have to be evaluated by other states, and we've been told unequivocally that the peer review process will not accept tests that don't have some open-ended questions that allow students to show a higher level of understanding than that which they're able to show with multiple choice.
And so do we have to do the open-ended test? I mean, what's it tied to? Why do we have to do the open-ended? I mean, I understand.
Well, and it wouldn't be entirely open-ended, right? And that's part of the cost, because the more open-ended we have, the more expensive it is. Right. And so we're trying to balance what
happens if we don't have open-ended?
Ultimately, we would have a CRCT and an EOCT which would not pass peer review, which would mean we would have a substandard test, which would mean we would lose at least all of our Title I related funding.
Thank you.
And possibly IDEA, because it's tied now to the No Child Left Behind, and it's significant.
Low income and special needs.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank
you. Yes, Representative Glanton. Yes, you're on.
I guess my question is, we're trying to get away from standardized testing, and we're trying to get away from the federal government dictating how we test our children. But yet I'm hearing that our testing abilities is tied to federal funding. Isn't that the same thing?
Well, I would parse it slightly differently. I would say the federal government requires that we have a test, and that test be robust in consideration of the peer evaluation. So it's not even the federal government, it's a peer of other states who would be evaluating our test, just as we are peers evaluating other states' tests. So we have to have a test, and that test has to be appropriately robust. Now the question, that much is federally mandated in order to receive Title I. The question of what's on the test, not the difficulty level, but what we're teaching and what the curriculum is, that's what we are not agreeing to. So, and the federal government will not be writing our test questions. So as long as the test questions are adequately challenging,
So
it's acceptable.
let me, and I'm loath to do this, come to Scott's defense here for a minute. He is the finance person.
Yeah.
If we have questions about the philosophical or the attitude about testing that aren't really financial questions, we can arrange to have somebody here tomorrow because we're meeting again tomorrow. Let's hold those questions for the people who are actually making those decisions, if that is agreeable with you.
Absolutely. I'm just trying to get to a point of where we're saying that our curriculum is being driven by mandates that have been put in place by the federal government, even if it means peer assessments. So, yes, I would like to talk about that.
Yeah. We'll try. Scott, will you arrange to have somebody here who can?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
At 2 o'clock tomorrow?
We'll have our testing folks and some of our curriculum folks here too. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, mine was also a curriculum question, and it had to do with counting as 15% of the child's grade. So I will ask that tomorrow also. Thank you, sir.
You owe me on that one, Scott.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Is that it?
Yes, sir. Subject to your questions.
Okay. Are there any other questions? You have the mic.
I had one further question, Mr. Chairman, regarding the PSAT. So my understanding is that Georgia used to pay a lot more, that we used to pay for the PSAT. We stopped paying for the PSAT, but the department was able to have the race to the top federal funds pay for it. And this is reflected that the race to the top funds are no longer going to be there, so that we can allow 10th graders, we can pay for 10th graders to take the PSAT.
That's correct. The governor, and I'm sorry I didn't point that out, the governor is requesting that we continue to provide the PSAT test, and we do provide that test to all 10th graders. In the past 3 years, we've been able to legally supplant the Race to the Top funds for that purpose.
And then I had a further question, because it's not mentioned here, but I recall we used to pay a lot more we used to cover more AP tests. And when I used to do the budget, I believe we paid for one AP test per year. I believe that's right. And then at some point, we stopped paying for it.
Well, we
only pay for free and reduced lunch.
Yes, ma'am. We made several adjustments. You are correct. Some years ago, it was $5 or $6 million. We paid for one AP test for everyone, and then we paid for unlimited for free and reduced. And then over time, as we were having to cut the budget, we at some point, I recall, eliminated non-free and reduced. Non-free and reduced, but still continued to offer free and reduced, somewhat unlimited. But as it stands now, we offer the AP for just one free and reduced test per year.
Which is, my understanding is it's $74 if you're not free and reduced is the cost of the test. It's $48 if you are free and reduced lunch. I mean, I guess I have a concern that we will have students not taking an AP test, perhaps because of cost. I don't know how school systems are adjusting to that, but I would be interested in knowing how much it would cost to go back. How much would it cost to pay one AP test for every? Of course, it would only be the incremental amount since we're already paying for one, which I personally don't think is enough for free and reduced lunch. I mean, you can't get into most of our Georgia colleges with one AP class, or many of them, I should say. I would just be interested in what the numbers are. Right, right. Well, what we used to pay for when I was doing the budget was one per year, and then maybe at some point we went to one, and then now we don't pay for any unless it's for one for free and reduced. I would be interested in knowing what would it cost to offer one AP test at one point in high school, which I still think is woefully inadequate for each student. Now, it wouldn't be multiplied times all high school students, because we know most high school students, many high school students never take an AP.
Correct.
So you'd have to do the math on.
And we'll get to that pretty easily.
You could look at the historical and kind of what it would be. I would just be curious what it would cost. And maybe it's not a problem for school systems. Maybe they're all wealthy enough where they can do that. But
well, no, typically the parents are paying for the test because
but we know
perhaps
there are
some school
parents that will
systems
not
are.
pay for it. Right. Yeah.
Other questions? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We appreciate you being here.
Mr. Chairman, we don't have curriculum. You said a lot of people.
Well, tomorrow we will have all the other agencies and groups that are funded through the budget, the TRS, CRS, DECAL, the communities and schools, all of those have been invited. And he's going to arrange to have testing and curriculum people here. And we will start with the testing and curriculum people tomorrow. We are going to allow some time for public comment at this point. If you have the desire to speak to the group, if you'll come over to the microphone. When you get up there, if you will give us your name and who you represent. And I understand. Yeah, I knew we weren't going to get
Scott.
answers from Scott.
Glasses.
No, that's not a problem. Don't worry about it.
I'm looking around, I've got my glasses. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Helen Sloat, and I'm with Nelson Mullins here in Atlanta, and we represent Multi-Agency Alliance for Children, Youth Villages, and Together Georgia, and we would just like to be supportive of the governor's proposal in the non-QBE formula grants of the money that he has outlined in this budget, and we would hope that you all would be supportive of those monies. It's a little over $300,000. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
I've
Mr.
seen
Chairman.
you before today.
Yeah, I know. Matthew Gamble and members of the committee, appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of the FY15 budget. I have with me Gail Smith from Cobb County. She's the director for school counseling for the Cobb County school system. And we certainly were very pleased by the governor's support for education funding in the state budget this year. It was very refreshing to see. I guess the concern that we would like to just mention to you, I think it came up earlier in some conversation, was the Education Finance Commission that met for 2 years. One of their second recommendation priority to change was school counselor ratios, which the legislature did last year in House Bill 283, which was the Title 20 cleanup bill that Representative Dudgeon had worked on with many others. And we honestly thought that that would generate additional funding for school counselors as a result of that, and it did through the governor's additional funding that he put in towards austerity. Unfortunately, you know, our concern is that school counselors probably will not see that in this particular budget because of so many other things that will come as a priority to that, and I understand that. But just did want to bring this to your attention as you work through the budget process, that school counselors were very pleased by the ratio change, and certainly hope that we can reach some sort of resolution as we move forward, either this year or possibly next year, to try to see that addressed in the state budget. So just wanted to mention that to you today. And Gail, if you'd like to say anything.
And thank you for your time and your work. In this next budget year, the additional funding we were hoping to see would fund for special ed and ESOL segments. Up until this year, the law only funded school counselors for general ed segments, which in many districts was not an adequate amount of money to fund counselors for their students. So we were hoping and counting for that additional funding for those segments, and understanding the complexity of the budget and how things work, but just wanted to put that on your radar screen. And thank you.
Thank you. I don't think you all were in here when Scott told us that the allotment sheets would reflect the higher ratio.
It does.
So I think that's a positive for you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and the committee. My name is Joel Mackey, and I represent the Georgia Vocational Agricultural Teachers Association. Many of y'all in a few weeks will see the FFA blue and gold jackets come to the Capitol, and we're certainly excited about that. I first want to thank this group for the work they did in the amended FY14 budget for extended day and extended year funds. Just as a reminder, agricultural education and our teachers are beneficiaries of extended year and extended day funds meant to help students at the end of each school day, 190 school days, and then again during the summer. We were very hopeful that'll remain in the budget, the FY14 amended budget, as it goes forward. I wanted to speak to this group today, and spoke to some of you already individually, about the need and hopefully consideration in the FY15 budget for additional extended day and extended year funds. Over the past few years, as all many line items in the budget, our teachers have suffered from cuts, and it's about a 10% off of fully funding extended day and extended year, which for some context, our teachers, our ag teachers out there are on 11-month contracts, maybe working 20 extra days. They're working those 20 extra days but getting paid for 18 unless local school systems are picking up the difference. If they're on a 12-month contract, they're working those 40 extra days and getting paid for 36. So just as the budget reflects a desire to end furlough days, we certainly hope the budget can reflect compensation for this extended day and extended year programs going forward. We have been the beneficiary of a great amount of growth in the agricultural education program over the past 5 years. We spend 25% less per student on extended day and extended year enrollees than we did 5 years ago, and it's just as we work through this budget process, we'll hope you'll consider working toward extended day and extended year funds being increased in this next FY15 budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there others? Hearing none, we will adjourn this meeting. We will be back in this room at 2 o'clock tomorrow beginning with testing and curriculum folks from DOE, and then all the other departments who choose to be here. Thank you.